As a young adult, I was fascinated by a computer game called SimCity. Remember it? The idea was that you were the mayor of a brand new city. You had a certain piece of land and you were responsible for building the infrastructure of that city, including roads, electricity, water. You had to zone certain parts of the city for residential living and for business and for retail. You had to build schools and places of worship. All the while, people were moving into your city, and you had to be careful to make sure that you were keeping them satisfied. Were they happy, or were they complaining? Were the taxes you imposed too high or too little? Essentially, your job was to make your city a place that people wanted to live. In the New Testament, the same kind of thing is happening. You see, the entire New Testament was written not just to bear witness to the life and the teachings of Jesus, but it's also constructed and meant to form a community of people who are going to carry on the message and the work and the life and the teaching of Jesus. It is about building a community of people who will carry on in Jesus' way. And so in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how the Gospel of Matthew in particular tries to go about the work of forming a community, which Matthew already has called the ecclesia, or the church. So join me today on The Way.
Like, you know those churches where, like, it's kind of contemporary music and, like, there's lyrics on and whatever and the cool lights? It'd be like that. It'd be very welcoming.
Very open. All races, all gender, LGBTQ, all of that.
It'd be very accepting of everybody.
Same-sex marriage would be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
LGBTQ plus pastors, everyone would be fine.
Anyone who wanted to join the church can come in the church. We're not gonna like limit it to specific people.
It's not hard, like to where if you don't come more than once every like 2 months, you won't get like kicked out or something.
Yeah.
Kind of inner city. It wouldn't look anything fancy. It would just be in a building, and we would accept everyone.
No cell phones during church.
If we had rules or guidelines, it would be along the lines of like everyone has to be nice and respectful towards each other. Everyone can speak their mind without other people judging them. But I don't think I would put a lot of rules in place just because people would feel to like...
Be kind. Don't be selfish. I was thinking about like dress code too for some reason, but like everyone
You're just
knows.
thinking my school.
No, I was thinking like if you come into church looking really dumb, like in stupid clothes, that's probably not good. But like normally.
But you wouldn't keep them out of the church for that, would you?
No.
I mean, yeah, as long as it was covering everything.
People can't just show up to church naked. I mean, that's a given,
if you
Libby.
show up to church in a bikini, that's not really like. What would you do if you saw someone in church in a bikini?
In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus uses the word ecclesia for the second and final time in the gospel. As we learned last week, the word ecclesia is translated church. And we know that because Jesus is quoted as talking about the church, that this reveals that this is Matthew's agenda. Matthew here is obviously speaking to his own church, to his own community that exists in the 80s. Now, if you were going to go about forming your own church or starting a brand new church and trying to pull together various people into one community of faith, what would be most important to establish? Well, first of all, I believe you'd have to establish your beliefs. What is it that you hold in common? What is it that you are going to believe together? And that's been established in Matthew chapter 16 when Jesus asked the disciples who they think he is. And of course, Peter responds and says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And that's the confession upon which the church is built. This is the one common belief that all those who come afterwards are going to have. Now, after belief, you might want to have a sense of authority. Who is the authority in the group? Who is going to be the one whose word will be the final word? Now, of course, Jesus is the one who's considered authoritative for the church and for the disciples, but when Jesus leaves, who will be the authority? Now, again, we learned last week that in chapter 16, Peter, as the model disciple, as the representative disciple, plays that authoritative role, especially in the very early church. And so the apostles and the disciples and those whom they train and they teach are going to be the authority into the future. But then finally, you have to ask the question, what kind of guidelines, what rules are going to guide this community? And that's what I believe chapter 18 is all about. In fact, you might call it a mini book of discipline, because it is Matthew chapter 18 that will lay out how is this community to function together? How is it that it's going to live together? And so the first part of the chapter deals with the characteristics of the members of the church, in which Jesus counsels you should be like children. In other words, you should show humility. Then he goes on to say that you should exercise care, pastoral care and concern for the least of these and the most vulnerable. And then Jesus moves on to give us a conflict resolution process so that when conflict arises in the church, as it certainly will, there is a clear procedure for how to deal with that so that community and a sense of community can be restored. The core idea that Jesus outlines in this chapter, however, is the idea of forgiveness. Most of all, Jesus, through Matthew, is trying to say to the church that what keeps us together, holds us together, and binds us together is the concept of forgiveness. Peter asked Jesus, "How many times do I have to forgive the church member who sins against me? Do I have to do that 7 times?" And Jesus says, "No, 70 times 7. In other words, don't keep count. We forgive again and again and again. Church life is messy, and that's why forgiveness is so important. Join me next time on The Way.